Mark thought he had the perfect marriage, a loving wife, 2 kids, and a stable life. But one text message shattered everything. Claire, the woman he trusted for 12 years, had been hiding an affair. Fueled by betrayal and heartbreak, Mark meticulously plotted his revenge, unraveling her secrets and tearing apart the life she built behind his back. But as the truth came to light, an unexpected tragedy turned his victory to ashes. Left haunted by guilt and regret, Mark discovers that sometimes, even when you win, you lose everything that truly matters. It was an ordinary Thursday evening, the kind where the monotony of life wraps around you like a heavy coat. Dinner was done, the kids were in their rooms, Emma watching YouTube videos and Ben finishing his science project, and Claire was in the shower. That's when it happened. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Just once. Nothing special. But it caught my eye. Claire never left her phone behind. Ever. That's what made me glance at it. And that's when I saw it. Can't wait to see you again tonight. The text sat there like a lit fuse, waiting to blow everything to hell. I stared at it, my mind trying to process what my eyes refused to believe. Ryan, it said at the top. Ryan. I racked my brain for a face, a name, anything. But there was nothing. I wanted to pick up her phone, to read every message, to demand answers the second she stepped out of that shower. My hands were shaking, hovering just above the device. But something held me back. Some whisper of instinct told me, don't show your cards. Instead, I grabbed a beer, sat at the kitchen table, and waited. I had no idea how long it had been when Claire finally came downstairs, fresh-faced, her damp hair curled around her shoulders. She smiled at me as though nothing was wrong. Hey, she said casually, her voice soft. Everything okay? I forced a smile back. Yeah, all good. She grabbed her phone and glanced at the screen. I watched her face closely, searching for a sign, something that would betray her. But Claire was good. Too good. A flash of relief softened her features, and she slid the phone into her pocket. I'm heading to bed early, she added. I'm exhausted. She kissed the top of my head, a perfunctory habit, before heading up the stairs. I sat there at the table, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. Claire had kissed me goodnight like she always did. She said she loved me every day. She was the woman I'd built a life with, 12 years of marriage, 2 kids, a mortgage, and a house that echoed laughter and love. And yet, I couldn't stop hearing the buzz of her phone. Can't wait to see you again tonight. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there beside her, listening to her steady breaths as she slept. Claire had no idea that the image she'd created, the perfect wife, had begun to fracture in my mind. I turned over, my gaze fixed on the ceiling as a single thought looped through my brain like a broken record. Who the hell is Ryan? The next morning, Claire was herself again, cheerful, chatty, and perfectly normal. She kissed the kids goodbye, grabbed her coffee, and was out the door before I could say anything. I sat there at the kitchen table long after the kids had left for school, staring into my coffee as though it held the answers. Part of me wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding, but the rational part of me knew better. Cheaters don't confess, they cover their tracks. That's when the doubt turned into something else, determination. I wasn't going to confront Claire without evidence. If there was one thing I'd learned in life, it was that facts win battles. Emotions cloud judgment. Claire wouldn't get away with this, not if I had anything to say about it. I spent the day gathering my tools. I was no fool when it came to technology. I worked in IT for a reason. I knew how to access phone records, trace numbers, and retrieve deleted messages. I didn't start with Claire's phone, though. That would tip her off. Instead, I went for the bills. Our phone plan gave us a breakdown of every call and text, numbers, dates, times. All of it. I logged into the account, pulled up the last 3 months of records, and there it was. Ryan's number. It popped up again and again, like a stain that wouldn't wash out. Hundreds of texts, dozens of calls, often late at night. My stomach twisted as I scrolled through the logs. There were patterns: weekends when Claire claimed to be working late, weeknights when she'd go to bed early. That's when the calls happened. That's when the texts flew back and forth. I felt like I was looking at a map of betrayal, each number a pin marking my wife's lies. And that's when I made my first move. That evening, while Claire was in the shower again, I grabbed her phone. I knew her passcode. Trust had made her careless. The messages were still there. Last night was amazing. Can't wait for the weekend. You're all I think about, babe. I'll make up an excuse. He'll never know. Each word burned like acid, eating away at me. I felt like my chest was collapsing under the weight of it all. Ryan wasn't just a fling, he was a secret life. And I was the idiot playing the role of faithful husband. I put the phone back exactly where I found it. Claire didn't suspect a thing. At dinner that night, she smiled across the table, laughing at something Emma said about her math teacher. She looked beautiful in that effortless way she always did, her eyes bright, her laughter warm. But I couldn't see her the same way anymore. She was a stranger. The person sitting across from me wasn't my wife, she was someone else. Someone who'd chosen him over me, over our family. And yet, I said nothing. I just smiled and played along, as though nothing had changed. Over the next week, I became a man with two faces. To Claire, I was the same old Mark, loving husband, good father. To myself, I was a hunter. I tracked her lies, watching her every move without her even knowing. Her patterns were predictable. Claire would leave for her late nights at work, dressed just a little nicer than usual. Her perfume a little stronger. The way she kissed me goodbye felt rushed. One night, I followed her. I watched from a distance as she pulled into a hotel parking lot. She sat in the car for a minute, fixing her lipstick in the mirror before stepping out. A man was waiting for her, a tall guy with dark hair and an expensive coat. He smiled as she approached, and they embraced. My stomach lurched, but I stayed hidden. I watched as they disappeared into the hotel lobby, arm in arm. I felt sick, like I'd been sucker punched in the gut, but I didn't move. I waited for an hour before driving home. When Claire returned that night, she slid into bed beside me like nothing had happened. "How was work?" I asked softly, testing her. She sighed, snuggling into the pillow. "Exhausting. I need to sleep." Her lies rolled off her tongue so easily that it made my skin crawl. I stared at the ceiling for hours, my thoughts a storm of rage and heartbreak. I knew I had everything I needed to confront her, to blow up her life the way she'd blown up mine. But revenge isn't a knee-jerk reaction. It's a strategy. A plan. And I had a plan. Claire had no idea what was coming. The days that followed were a careful dance, and I was both the observer and the actor. Claire still kissed me goodbye in the mornings. She still made small talk about her day and laughed at my dad jokes like nothing was wrong. But every word, every glance, every kiss, it was all a lie. I couldn't stand the sound of her voice anymore. The betrayal dripped from every syllable, though she was completely unaware that the game had shifted. While she lived in her illusion of secrecy, I was building the foundation for my revenge. I wasn't impulsive. I wasn't sloppy. I couldn't afford to be. I had 2 kids to think about. Emma and Ben didn't deserve to be casualties in this war Claire had started. So, every move I made was calculated. Every step was meticulous. I began with gathering evidence. Cheating is emotional, but divorce is legal, and evidence tips the scales. I downloaded every message between her and Ryan from her phone. With a simple cloning app, I mirrored her texts onto my laptop. Every, "I love you," every, "can't wait to see you again," appeared in real time. It was surreal, watching their conversations unfold while she sat across from me on the couch. Claire would smile at her phone, biting her lip like a teenage girl. I pretended not to notice, but my blood boiled. There was no remorse in her. No guilt. Only the thrill of a secret life. One night, while she was texting him under a blanket, I cleared my throat. "What's so funny?" I asked, feigning curiosity. She looked up, startled. "Oh, just something from work. Megan sent me a meme about the new guy in marketing." Lies. The words tasted so familiar now, I almost expected them. "Sounds funny," I replied, forcing a chuckle. I turned back to the TV, my heart pounding, knowing she'd been texting him. It amazed me how easily she lied to my face, how well she had perfected her performance. Over the next week, I mapped out every piece of her deception. Claire's weekends, working late. She was with Ryan. The conferences. Hotel getaways. Her new wardrobe. For him. Every detail fit together like a grotesque puzzle, and as the picture became clearer, so did my plan. I couldn't just confront her. No. That would be too simple. Too easy. Claire had chosen to betray me in secret, and I would unravel her world the same way, with quiet precision. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a fight. Instead, I'd make her watch everything she built crumble around her, piece by piece. I contacted Ryan's wife. Her name was Stephanie. Finding her was surprisingly easy. Ryan's number led me to his social media profile, and from there, it was only a matter of scrolling through vacation photos and holiday posts until I found his beaming wife and 2 kids. Stephanie had no idea. When I first messaged her, I wasn't sure what to expect. How do you tell someone that their spouse is a liar? How do you blow up their life the way yours was blown up? I kept it simple. "Hi Stephanie. I know this is hard to believe, but I have evidence that your husband Ryan is having an affair with my wife. I thought you deserved to know." I attached screenshots of texts between Claire and Ryan. I didn't go into details. The evidence was enough. Her reply came 2 hours later. "Is this some kind of joke?" I sent more screenshots, messages with dates, timestamps, even photos Claire had sent of herself in the new lingerie she'd claimed to buy for me. Her response was immediate this time. "Call me." I dialed the number with shaking hands. She picked up on the first ring. "Who are you?" Stephanie's voice was strained. Angry. "My name is Mark," I said calmly. "My wife is Claire. I found out a week ago that she's been seeing Ryan." There was silence. I could hear her breathing, trying to hold herself together. "How do you know?" she asked finally, her voice cracking. "I have months of phone records, texts, and photos," I said. "I can send them all to you." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve the truth," I replied simply. Just like I did. Stephanie didn't cry. At least, not while we were on the phone. She just whispered, "Thank you," before hanging up. I sat there, the phone heavy in my hand, staring at the wall. I felt no joy in what I'd done. No triumph. Just emptiness. But this wasn't about feeling better. This was about justice. Claire thought she was invincible, that her lies would go unnoticed. But truth has a way of cutting through even the thickest deceptions. The next step in my plan was financial preparation. I worked quietly, opening a new bank account in my name alone and transferring half of our savings into it. It wasn't theft. It was protection. If Claire wanted to burn down our marriage, I wasn't going to let her take me down with it. I also began documenting everything, every late night, every lie, every suspicious detail. I made copies of our financial statements, property deeds, and Claire's recent purchases. A $3,000 charge to a jewelry store stood out like a beacon. She'd bought him a gift. The realization made my chest tighten. While I'd been buying groceries, paying the mortgage, and saving for our kids' college, she was buying him gifts with our money. I couldn't let it slide. The hardest part was pretending. Pretending to love her. Pretending I didn't know. One night, as we lay in bed, Claire turned to me. Her hand brushed my arm, and she smiled softly. "You've been quiet lately. Is everything okay?" I forced myself to smile back, though it felt like my face might crack. "Yeah, I've just been busy at work." "You should take a break," she murmured. "Maybe we could plan a trip. Just the two of us." I stared at her, my wife, who was plotting weekends with another man while pretending to plan a vacation with me. "Maybe," I replied, turning away so she wouldn't see the anger in my eyes. Her lies were becoming harder to stomach. I could feel the weight of them pressing on my chest every time she spoke. I needed this to end. That weekend, Claire packed a small overnight bag, kissed me on the cheek, and told me she was heading to a last-minute work conference. I smiled, waved her off, and watched as she drove away. The second she was gone, I made my final preparations. I collected the printed messages, phone records, and photos, organizing them into a neat file. I forwarded a summary of the evidence to my lawyer, who assured me that everything was airtight. Claire wouldn't be able to lie her way out of this one. And finally, I made a few calls. Stephanie had agreed to meet me. It was time to pull the curtain back on Claire's perfect little world. Her betrayal was about to come full circle, and she didn't even see it coming. The house was silent that Saturday evening as I sat in my office, the file of evidence resting neatly on the desk in front of me. Claire's absence, once a minor inconvenience, now felt like a gaping void filled with every betrayal I had discovered. I imagined her now, checking into a hotel room with Ryan, her bag slung over her shoulder, a knowing smile on her lips. The thought burned. But anger wasn't going to help me now. I had work to do. Stephanie and I had agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop just outside town the following afternoon. She wanted answers, and I wanted someone who could help me close the book on Claire's lies. I looked at the clock, midnight. Emma and Ben were fast asleep, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around them. For their sake, I had to hold everything together, even as my life crumbled beneath my feet. The next day, I arrived at the cafe early. It was a small, unassuming place with dark wood furniture and the faint smell of fresh coffee lingering in the air. I chose a table by the window, where I could see the parking lot. Stephanie walked in 10 minutes later. She was a petite woman in her late 30s, her dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She wore sunglasses even indoors, as if trying to shield herself from the weight of what she was about to confront. When she spotted me, she hesitated. For a moment, I thought she might turn around and leave, but then she squared her shoulders and walked over. "Mark?" she asked quietly. I stood, offering a polite nod. "Stephanie. Thanks for meeting me." She sat down across from me, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. She didn't remove her sunglasses, and I didn't push. "Let's get this over with," she said, her voice tight. I slid the folder across the table. "Everything you need to know is in there." Stephanie didn't open it right away. Instead, she stared at it, her knuckles white against the cup. "How long have they been?" "Over a year, as far as I can tell," I replied softly. Claire used her business trips as an excuse to meet him. "She's been lying to me for months." Stephanie nodded slowly, as though she'd already known but needed confirmation. Finally, she opened the folder. She sifted through the printed messages, her expression unreadable behind the dark lenses. When she reached the photos, her hand trembled slightly. "God," she whispered. I stayed quiet, giving her the space she needed to process it. I knew the feeling all too well, the sense that your world had shifted on its axis and nothing would ever feel steady again. Stephanie closed the folder and set it on the table. I don't understand. Ryan and I have 2 kids. A life. How could he? Her voice cracked. I've asked myself the same question about Claire, I said, my tone even. I don't think we'll ever get an answer that makes sense. Stephanie let out a shuddering breath, finally removing her sunglasses. Her eyes were red, her face pale. So what now? I met her gaze, steady and determined. Now we take their perfect little secret and tear it apart. She blinked, surprised. What do you mean? I'm filing for divorce, I explained. I have all the evidence I need to make sure Claire doesn't take me for a fool. She's not getting the house. She's not getting my kids. And she sure as hell isn't getting away with this. Stephanie nodded slowly, understanding dawning on her face. And you want me to? Do what you need to do, I said simply. Tell your lawyer. Confront Ryan. Whatever you think is best. But they need to know that the walls are closing in. They're not going to get away with this. She stared at me for a long moment, as if weighing my words. Then, slowly, a spark of resolve ignited in her eyes. I want him to pay for this. I want him to feel what I'm feeling right now. I nodded. Good. Because that's exactly what's going to happen. That night, Claire came home late, as expected. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to watch TV, when I heard the front door creak open. Hey, she called softly. You're still up? Yeah, I replied without turning around. Couldn't sleep. Claire appeared in the doorway, her overnight bag slung over her shoulder. Her face was flushed, her hair slightly disheveled, but she smiled as though nothing was wrong. You okay? She asked, her voice light. Fine, I lied. I turned to look at her, my face carefully blank. How was the conference? She hesitated. Just for a split second. It was so subtle, most people wouldn't have noticed. But I wasn't most people. It was good, she said, forcing a smile. Long, but productive. Glad to hear it. I stood, stretching my arms. I'm heading to bed. You should, too. You look exhausted. Her smile faltered for a moment, but she nodded. Yeah. Good idea. As I walked past her, I caught the faint scent of cologne, not mine. My jaw tightened, but I didn't let it show. Claire was too wrapped up in her lies to notice the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Over the next few days, I set the final pieces of my plan into motion. I met with my lawyer, who assured me that the evidence I had would leave Claire with nothing but regrets. I gathered financial statements, account balances, and property deeds, everything I needed to protect myself and my kids. Then I made a call to Stephanie. Are you ready? I asked her. Yes, she replied firmly. He doesn't know what's coming. Neither did Claire. The timing was perfect. I had planned it all down to the last detail. Claire would come home that Friday evening, expecting everything to be as it always was. Instead, she'd walk straight into the wreckage of her lies. That Friday, I made dinner for the kids, playing the role of doting husband one last time. Claire had texted earlier that she'd be home late, another work dinner, she claimed. I didn't care. She could take her time. At 8:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. Emma and Ben were in the living room watching a movie, oblivious to what was about to unfold. I opened the door to find Stephanie standing there, holding a stack of papers. You ready? I asked. She nodded. Let's do this. We walked inside, and I placed the papers, Claire's texts, the photos, the financial statements, in the center of the dining table. The house was silent except for the muffled sounds of the kids' movie. I sat down at the head of the table, my hands folded in front of me, and waited. At 9:15 p.m., I heard Claire's car pull into the driveway. My heart was steady, my breathing calm. I glanced at Stephanie, who sat quietly at the other end of the table, her expression hard and unreadable. The front door opened. Claire walked in, humming softly to herself. "Mark," she called, dropping her bag by the door. "I'm home." "In here," I said evenly. Her footsteps echoed through the hallway, and then she appeared in the doorway to the dining room. When she saw Stephanie sitting there, her smile faltered. Her gaze flickered to me, then to the papers spread across the table. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tight. I leaned back in my chair, meeting her eyes. "Sit down, Claire." Her face paled. "Mark." I said, "Sit down." Claire hesitated, her gaze darting back to Stephanie, who hadn't said a word. Finally, she pulled out a chair and sat down across from me. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them in her lap. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice wavering. I pushed the stack of evidence toward her. "Why don't you tell me?" Claire glanced at the papers, then back at me. I don't understand." "You understand perfectly," I said coldly. "I know, Claire. About Ryan. About the lies. About all of it." Her face went white as the blood drained from it. "Mark, Don't," I interrupted. "Don't insult me with another lie." The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Claire stared at the evidence in front of her, her shoulders slumping as the weight of the truth finally crushed her. Stephanie spoke for the first time, her voice calm but sharp. "Your little secret is over. Ryan's going to find out exactly what he's lost, just like you." Claire looked at her, wide-eyed. "Stephanie. You don't get to talk to me," Stephanie snapped. I stood, pushing my chair back. "Here's how this is going to go," I said, my voice steady. "You're going to pack your things. You're going to leave this house. And you're going to explain to our kids why their mother is a liar." "Mark, please," Claire whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't want to hear it," I said. "You made your choice. Now you live with it." Claire's tears fell freely now, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." "But it is," I replied coldly. "And you have no one to blame but yourself." I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving Claire and Stephanie in silence. As I climbed the stairs to check on Emma and Ben, I realized that I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt free. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of Claire packing her things downstairs. Every now and then, a quiet sob would break through the stillness, but I didn't go down to her. Whatever sympathy I might have had for her had burned away weeks ago, leaving only ashes. It wasn't until nearly 2 a.m. that the house finally fell silent. I heard the front door creak open, followed by the faint slam of her car door and the sound of the engine fading into the distance. Claire was gone. I exhaled slowly, as though I'd been holding my breath for days. It was over. The next morning felt surreal. The kids woke up as usual, completely unaware that their mother wasn't coming back. I'd rehearsed what to say in my head all night, but when Emma asked where Mom was, the words caught in my throat. "She's staying somewhere else for a while," I said gently, avoiding her questioning eyes. "She just needs some time." Emma frowned, her face scrunching in confusion, but she didn't push. Ben, still groggy, just shrugged and grabbed his cereal. Everything was quiet without Claire. Too quiet. I told myself it was better this way. That I had done the right thing for everyone involved. But as I moved through the day, making breakfast, cleaning up, taking the kids to soccer practice, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That some part of me had been left behind in that dining room with Claire. The feeling lingered like a shadow I couldn't escape. 2 days later, the call came. It was a Tuesday evening. I just finished helping Emma with her math homework when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but something about it made my chest tighten. "Hello?" I answered. "Is this Mark?" "Mark Evans?" a woman's voice asked, sounding hesitant. "Yes." "Who is this?" The voice wavered. "This is Officer Diaz with the county police. I'm calling about your wife. Claire Evans." Time froze. My heart stopped mid-beat. "What about Claire?" I said, my voice sharp, desperate. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'm so sorry to inform you, sir, but Claire was involved in a car accident late last night. She didn't make it." The words didn't make sense. They floated in the air, disconnected from reality. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Her vehicle went off the road about 3 miles outside of town," the officer explained gently. "It appears she lost control. There were no other cars involved. It may have been the weather, rain made the road slick." No, that can't be right," I muttered, shaking my head as though I could undo the words. I just saw her." "I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Evans," Officer Diaz said softly. "We'll need you to come in and formally identify her." The drive to the morgue was a blur. I don't remember what I told the kids or how I managed to keep myself together. All I know is that when I finally stood in that cold, sterile room and the attendant pulled back the sheet, I felt the floor drop out from beneath me. There she was. Claire. Her face was pale and still, her eyes closed, her blonde hair spread out across the pillow. She looked peaceful, as though she were only sleeping. I reached out with a shaking hand to touch her cheek, but I pulled back before I made contact. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't even sure what I was apologizing for. For not confronting her sooner. For unraveling her life. For hating her so much in those final days. The attendant covered her again, and I turned away, feeling hollowed out. The funeral was small. I didn't invite Ryan, and thankfully, he didn't show up. Claire's parents came, along with a few friends and coworkers. The kids didn't understand why everyone was so sad, why their mother wasn't coming back. Emma cried into my shoulder through the service, asking me over and over, "Why, Dad? Why did this happen?" I didn't have an answer. I just held her tight, trying to keep myself from falling apart. As I watched the casket lowered into the earth, a sick, crushing guilt settled in my chest. I had won. I had destroyed her life, exposed her lies, and taken everything she thought she had. But at what cost? I'd never wanted this. Not really. I thought back to the last time I saw her, how she'd looked at me in that dining room, her tears falling as she whispered, "It wasn't supposed to be like this." She was right. It wasn't. A week after the funeral, I found a letter. It was buried in the bottom of Claire's dresser drawer, scrawled in her neat, looping handwriting. "Mark. I don't know how to fix what I've broken. I don't even know where to begin. I thought I wanted freedom, excitement, something new. But all I found was regret. I love you, Mark. I always have. I just lost sight of it somewhere along the way. If you can ever forgive me, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make this right. Claire." I sat on the floor of our bedroom, holding the letter in my hands as tears slipped silently down my face. She had been trying to come back. Maybe not that night, not right away, but eventually. Part of me wondered if she'd already realized her mistake. If she'd been driving that road, crying, trying to figure out how to fix what she'd done. Maybe that's why she lost control. The days turned into weeks, and life moved on, as it always does. I threw myself into taking care of the kids, trying to fill the void their mother had left behind. But no matter how much I smiled, no matter how many bedtime stories I read or soccer games I attended, I couldn't escape the crushing weight of what if. What if I hadn't pushed her out? What if I'd confronted her sooner, given her a chance to make things right? What if I hadn't been so consumed with revenge that I failed to see the woman I'd loved for 12 years slipping away? Claire wasn't just my wife. She was the mother of my children, the woman I had built a life with. And now she was gone. Some nights, I sat alone in the dark, clutching the letter, whispering words she would never hear. "I'm sorry, Claire. I'm so sorry. I had won the battle. But in the end, I'd lost everything that mattered."